Take it elsewhere. This section isn't for you. That's what he barked at me. Loud. Dark. Like I was trash someone forgot to sweep away. He didn't ask for my name. Didn't look at the reservation on my phone. He saw two black women, me and my mother, dressed sharp, seated at a white linen table, and he saw a problem. A uniformed cop, leaning on authority like it was a crutch, glaring at us like we were intruders in our own city. This wasn't some back-alley diner. It was a French fusion restaurant on the corner of 8th and Monroe, tucked beneath a gleaming glass tower that reflected the Atlanta sun like a mirror of privilege. Place you had to book 2 weeks in advance. A place where the wine list had its own leather-bound binder. But none of that mattered. Because when you're black and walk into certain places in America, you don't just enter a room. You challenge the assumptions of everyone already seated. Welcome to Underrated Black Voices, a channel where we turn those silent humiliations into stories that make noise. What you're about to hear is a fictional retelling, inspired by the lived experiences of thousands of black men and women. It's real in all the ways that count. And if you've ever been made to feel invisible in a space you paid to be in, this story is for you. I had just taken my mother out for her 66th birthday. She was wearing a coral-colored wrap dress that made her skin glow, her silver hair pulled into a low bun. I had on a cream pantsuit and pumps that hurt like hell, but it was worth it to see the look on her face when she walked in. This was her favorite cuisine. I made sure the window table was reserved in her name. Everything was perfect, until he showed up. The cop wasn't even there for us. Least not at first. He was seated at the bar, chatting up the manager, sipping coffee like he belonged. He had the kind of presence that tried to fill every room. Built like an oak tree. Ozka. Badge clipped to the belt like a trophy. When he turned and saw us, I saw his face twist. The smile vanished. His hand gripped the back of the bar stool like he needed to steady himself. He marched toward us like we were trespassers. You can't sit here, he said. This section isn't for you. Blinked. Excuse me. You heard me. You people think dressing up makes you welcome. Move before I call someone who'll move you. He said it with his hand hovering near the belt, near the holster. I looked around. No one moved. No one said a word. Not even the waiter who had just poured our water. Frozen room. Eyes wide. Mouths half open. But silence. My mother reached for her purse. No, I said softly. Stay seated. I stood slowly. Not rushed. Not angry. I wanted to be very clear. He was the one out of line. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, scrolled through a single contact, and hit the call button. My voice didn't rise. Didn't shake. But it cut through the silence like a scalpel. Terminate the lease for tenant number 17. Effective immediately. I ended the call and looked him straight in the eye. The manager's phone buzzed less than a minute later. He excused himself from the cop's side and darted into the back office, muttering something about needing to check something. Seconds later, I saw the color drain from his face through the frosted glass. His mouth moved, and he turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, where he could see the placard above the entrance. The Belmont building. My building. The cop was still standing there, confused. Not angry now, just off balance. You think this scares me, he said, but even he didn't believe his own voice anymore. I didn't answer. I turned to my mother and offered her my arm. Let's go. We'll eat somewhere people don't need a badge to feel big. As we walked out, the room stayed quiet. Dead quiet. And somehow, every footstep I took sounded louder than the one before. The sun outside was hot. Blinding. But my pulse was ice. What no one in that room knew was this. I didn't just own the restaurant's lease. I owned the entire block. Every boutique. Every office on the upper floors. Every cobblestone in that historic sidewalk they loved to brag about. And this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was just the last time it would happen on my watch. We walked back to the car in silence. Not because we had nothing to say, but because there was too much. The kind of silence that grows thick between generations. The kind of silence that knows this moment is just one brick in a wall built centuries high. My mother didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead, her arm still looped through mine. Her grip was light, but I could feel the weight behind it. This wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel small in public. But I had sworn, after everything she had endured to raise me, that I would never let anyone humiliate her again. That cop didn't just insult me. He violated her dignity. And there are some wounds that don't show up on skin but bleed all the same. I unlocked the car, helped her in, then slid into the driver's seat. My hands trembled as I started the engine. Back to the house, I asked quietly. But she didn't answer. Not right away. Her voice came after a long breath. No. Drive to Midtown. There's that new Vietnamese place near the art center. I've been wanting to try it. I nodded and pulled onto the road. It was her way of reclaiming the day. And I respected that. But inside something had cracked. And once a crack begins, it never stays small for long. 30 minutes later, we were seated in a warm, bustling cafe filled with color and laughter. No one looked at us twice. The waiter was a short woman with a pixie cut and a neon smile. She complimented my mother's earrings. Called her ma'am with respect that felt earned, not forced. For the first time that day, my chest loosened. We ordered grilled lemongrass chicken and pho. My mother added a Vietnamese iced coffee she couldn't pronounce, and we laughed about it like nothing had happened. But we both knew something had happened. And pretending it hadn't would be just another act of submission. Midway through our meal, my phone buzzed. It was Diane, my lead counsel. It's done. Official notice sent. They have 30 days to vacate. Do you want PR involved? I stared at the screen for a few seconds before replying. No press. Not yet. Let them feel the silence first. Because silence, real silence, can be louder than any headline. I put my phone away and smiled at my mother. How's the coffee? Strong. Like your mouth today, she said without looking up. You always did know how to weaponize stillness. That made me laugh. But only for a moment. 'Cause she wasn't wrong. I had built my entire life on restraint. On quiet power. On turning boardrooms of old white men into frozen zoos with just a look. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout or stomp or threaten. But when I moved, people listened. They just didn't always know why. I finished lunch with her and drove her home. She kissed my cheek at the door, held my face in her hands and whispered, "You make me proud. But I want you to rest now. Don't carry the whole world every time someone shows their ignorance." He nodded. But in my gut I already knew. I wasn't done. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about prevention. That building on 8th and Monroe housed 9 active tenants. 5 restaurants, 3 retail boutiques, and 1 boutique law firm on the upper floors. All of them operated under commercial leases that I had personally signed off on. Until now, I had never enforced bias clauses. But as of today, every single lease was under review. I spent that night going through security footage. Yes, I had cameras installed discreetly under the guise of infrastructure upgrades. I didn't do it to spy. I did it to protect. And on that particular day, the footage showed everything. The cop approaching our table. The waiter looking away. The manager glancing over and then deliberately walking into the kitchen. And worst of all, a couple at the next table. White, middle-aged, affluent. Smirking and whispering behind their wine glasses like they'd just witnessed something delicious. I played that clip over and over, watching the moment he leaned in. The way he jabbed a finger toward my mother's plate. The way he said "you people" with the precision of a blade. And with each replay, the anger in me stopped burning and started crystallizing. The next morning I walked into my office on Peachtree Street. It was glass and wood and quiet elegance. I didn't need gold nameplates or corporate art to prove I belonged. My presence was enough. The receptionist greeted me with a nod. I didn't smile back. Call a meeting. All tenants. Mandatory. 3 p.m. Boardroom. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Just started dialing. At 2:55 p.m., the first tenant arrived, owner of a Mediterranean fusion spot 2 floors above the restaurant in question. He gave me that half-confused, half-nervous smile people give when they don't know if they're in trouble. By 3:03 p.m. the room was full. 9 business owners. 9 faces watching me. I stood at the head of the table. No notes. No slides. Yesterday, I began. My mother and I were publicly humiliated inside a building I own. By someone who wasn't even your employee. And you all stood by and let it happen. A ripple moved through the room. Some shifted in their chairs. One woman opened her mouth. Then thought better of it. I've reviewed all of your leases. And starting today, every lease on this block will include an anti-bias provision, with quarterly compliance training. Someone cleared their throat. That seems a bit extreme. I looked at him. Lowly. Was what happened to me and my mother not extreme? Silence. Continued. If you cannot ensure that every guest, every employee, and every officer who sets foot in your space treats black and brown patrons with the same dignity afforded to everyone else, you will lose your lease. No exceptions. No appeals. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was respect. 'Cause they knew I meant it. They knew I had the power to burn their names off every lease and replace them within a week. And they knew now that I would use it. By the time I left that boardroom, not a single tenant looked me in the eye. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Not because I needed to be feared, but because I needed them to remember. People forget words. They forget promises. But they never forget how shame tastes when served cold and final. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught my own reflection in the brushed metal doors. Dark. Unbothered. But behind my stillness something stirred. Something deeper than anger. Something older. A reckoning not just for me, but for every black woman who's ever been told to know her place while standing in a building she helped build. I went straight home. No dinner plans. No distractions. That night, I sat in my study and pulled out the folder. The one I hadn't opened in almost 7 years. Inside was a thick manila envelope marked Property, Block 71, Acquisition History, and beneath that, a handwritten letter. Faded with time, but the words still burned. Baby girl, one day someone will look you dead in the face and tell you you don't belong in a place you paid for. When that happens, don't scream. Don't fight. Just pull the deed. My father's words. Written before he died. Scribbled in ink on legal pad paper. Folded inside the original deed to the Belmont building. A man who once worked 2 janitorial jobs to buy his first duplex. A man who taught me how to file eviction papers before I could legally drive. He never made it past high school. But he made damn sure I knew how to own the land people walked on. And now I was walking it for both of us. I closed the folder and made a call. Not to Diane. Not to the press. To Councilwoman Marla Jameson. Marla, I said, skipping the pleasantries. It's time. There was a pause. Then a slow exhale. You sure? As sure as that cop was when he tried to throw me out of my own restaurant. Then I'll set the hearing. Civil Rights Compliance Committee meets next Thursday. Bring your receipts. I hung up and leaned back. Receipts. Oh, I had those. I spent the next 2 days compiling a report that would make headlines if I wanted it to. But I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't about going viral. This wasn't TikTok activism. This was legacy. And legacies are built in silence before they're echoed in sound. The report included footage of the incident at the restaurant, lease clauses from all tenants showing non-discrimination requirements, a list of prior complaints filed by other black patrons against businesses in the same block, most of which had quietly settled, and a timeline of my private interventions, conversations, warnings, memos, all ignored. I arrived at the hearing with a single manila folder, a clean gray blazer, and a rested mind. The committee chamber was mostly empty. Just 7 officials seated on an elevated platform, 1 legal stenographer, and Marla seated in the center. She was tough, not flashy. Skin like warm bronze, eyes like they'd seen too much. She nodded when I entered but didn't smile. That was our unspoken agreement. No favoritism, only truth. The lead councilman cleared his throat. Ms. Dalton, we've reviewed your filing. It alleges racial discrimination and systemic neglect across tenanted businesses you own on Monroe and 8th. Is that correct? Yes, I replied. You understand that these are serious claims. I leaned forward. So was being told by a uniformed officer that my presence was unwelcome, 30 seconds before my restaurant's lease was cancelled. A murmur ran through the chamber. One of the officials sat straighter. Marla cut in. Please continue, Ms. Dalton. You may present your case. I opened the folder, slid the report across the table to the assistant clerk, and spoke slowly. Everything you'll find in that folder outlines how Black patrons have been systemically treated as second-class guests, while business owners look the other way. I warned them. They ignored me. Now I'm asking this council to authorize a local ordinance requiring mandatory anti-bias certification for any business leasing commercial property within a designated cultural protection zone. There was silence. Then a soft voice from the left. Is that even enforceable? I looked at him. Yes, 'cause I own the buildings. And I'm not asking the city to intervene in private property. I'm asking the city to give this policy teeth. Back it. Validate it. Make it an example. They reviewed the files. I stood still. Quiet. Watching. Marla finally spoke. We'll take a vote in 72 hours. 3 days later the vote passed, 6-1. Block 71 was now officially Atlanta's first private-owned, city-backed bias-free cultural business zone. Tenants had 60 days to comply with the new certification or forfeit their leases. The fallout came fast. That cop. Gone from the rotation. Reassigned, they said. I didn't care where. Just that he never set foot in my building again. The restaurant. Closed for renovations. A rebranding effort that fooled no one. But the real shift came weeks later, when other landlords called me. How'd you structure the clause? Would your legal team be open to consulting? I had a similar incident. Can I borrow your language? And just like that, the crack had spread. From a single building to a citywide movement. I didn't make speeches. I didn't grant interviews. But people were listening anyway. They had no choice. Because when a Black woman moves in silence, the ground still shifts beneath her. And Atlanta was rumbling. The calls kept coming. First from other property owners. Then from legal firms. Then from city councils outside of Atlanta, Savannah, Charleston, even Charlotte, all asking the same question. How did you pull this off without setting the whole city on fire? I gave them the same answer every time. By making the right people uncomfortable quietly enough that they had no excuse to fight back. That's the thing about power. It doesn't always wear a crown or carry a gavel. Sometimes power is the silence before a building gets sold. The pause between a signature and an eviction notice. The breath someone takes when they realize they just yelled at the wrong Black woman. But not everyone was happy. 3 weeks after the ordinance passed, I got an unexpected knock on my office door. It wasn't Diane. It wasn't Marla. It was him. Detective Alan G. Rourke. The same cop who had humiliated me in the restaurant. But this time he wasn't in uniform. He wore a charcoal blazer 2 sizes too small and a badge clipped to his belt like he forgot to take it off. He stepped inside like he owned the place, but I could tell he was grasping. I need to speak with you, he said. No greeting. No apology. I didn't offer a seat. About what? His jaw tightened. About what happened. And what's happening now. You mean your reassignment. I mean the fallout. You went after my department like I shot your dog. You made this personal. And blinked. You made it personal when you told my mother to take it elsewhere. You made it personal when you said you people like it was a crime to be seated near white tablecloths. He stepped closer and for a moment I saw the flash. The man from the restaurant standing tall with a hand near his hip. Old habits die hard. But this time I didn't flinch. You know who I am, I said calmly. Yeah, he spat. I know who you are now. No, I corrected. You always should have known. He didn't have a comeback for that. He looked around the office. The glass bookshelves. The exposed brick. The framed contract from the first building I bought when I was 28. You didn't need to destroy me, he said quietly. I didn't, I said. You did that yourself. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and left. No apology. No remorse. Just the smell of a man choking on the smoke of his own burnt bridge. I thought that was the end of it. But power, when threatened, doesn't retreat. Mutates. And 3 nights later, my mother's house was vandalized. Spray paint on the front door. Stay in your lane. 2 slashed tires. A brick through the living room window, thrown hard enough to split the frame. My mother called me at 1:16 a.m. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was sharp, controlled. But I could hear it beneath her breath, fear. I drove there without blinking. Called the police on the way. Not because I trusted them but because paper trails matter. When I arrived, the cruiser was already in the driveway. 2 younger officers stood outside, looking visibly uncomfortable. Not from the crime, but from the woman who called it in. They turned when I stepped out of my car. You the daughter? No. I'm the building owner who forced your precinct to take a bias training course, I said, brushing past them. Don't insult my mother with weak questions. They asked the usual. Any enemies? Any threats? I gave them my statement, requested a forensic sweep of the brick, and filed an official complaint. But I knew better than to wait for justice from a system still nursing its bruised ego. Instead, I hired my own team. Not lawyers. Not PAs. Veterans. 3 women and 2 men. All former military. 1 ex-FBI. They moved like shadows and thought like chess masters. Within 48 hours they gave me a name. Not Rourke, but someone who had once served with him. A man with a history of off-duty incidents, swept under departmental rugs. His social media was filled with flag-draped slogans and "Take Back the Streets" rants. And 4 days before the vandalism he'd liked a post. If she's so powerful, why not make her bleed? I compiled everything. Turned it into a legal packet. Handed it to Diane with 1 sentence. Take the gloves off. Within a week, there was an arrest. Local media tried to spin it as a veteran with mental health issues. But I made 1 phone call, to a black female anchor I knew personally, and suddenly the narrative shifted. Building owner who challenged police harassment now faces targeted threats. That headline ran for 2 days straight. And that's when things really changed. Because now the silence had been broken. Now the city had to take sides. I started receiving emails, letters, handwritten notes slipped under my office door. From people who looked like me. From people who had been told to take it elsewhere their whole lives. They told me about hotels, about banks, about schools, about being followed in boutiques, about being accused of theft in bookstores. And most of them ended their message with the same question. What can I do? So I gave them an answer. I built a toolkit, free PDF, 10 pages, plain language, explaining how to identify bias in commercial spaces, how to document it, how to escalate it, and most importantly, how to own the damn building so no one could ever kick you out again. We launched it quietly. Just an email list. No ads, no press. By the end of the first week, it had 23,000 downloads. That's when the press came anyway. CNN requested an interview. I declined. But Ebony called. Said yes. Because legacy isn't just about fighting the battles. It's about leaving behind a map. And I was ready to draw mine. The Ebony interview changed everything. Not because I said anything radical. Not because I shouted. Not because I cried. But because I didn't. The interviewer, a sharp, soft-spoken woman named Leah Freeman, asked me 1 question that stopped time. When did you first realize you were more powerful than the people trying to humiliate you? I didn't answer right away. I leaned back in the velvet chair in my office, the skyline of Atlanta shimmering behind me, and thought carefully. It wasn't in the restaurant, I finally said. It wasn't even when I cancelled the lease. It was years ago, when I signed the deed on a building I used to clean toilets in. That was the first moment I realized. Ownership doesn't shout. It whispers. But you only hear it when you stop trying to be accepted and start claiming space. That quote went viral. Not just on Black Twitter. Not just in real estate circles. But in classrooms. In community centers. On t-shirts. Suddenly my inbox was full of requests. Keynote speeches. Panels. Book deals. TEDx invites. I turned down almost all of them. Because I wasn't chasing fame. I was building an infrastructure. Quietly. Relentlessly. Behind the scenes my team, now doubled in size, began acquiring smaller properties in high-friction zones. Areas where racial bias had been documented, but never challenged. We weren't looking for headlines. We were looking for patterns. We reviewed complaint data, mapped locations, cross-referenced incidents with municipal silence. By the end of the second quarter, I owned 5 more buildings in Atlanta, and we were drafting a charter to expand the bias-free cultural business zone model into nearby cities. But power makes people nervous. And the higher I climbed, the louder the whispers became. She's aggressive. She's dangerous. She's trying to burn down the system. And worst of all, she doesn't smile anymore. As if my mouth owed anyone joy while cleaning up messes I didn't make. But the backlash wasn't just talk. Came in waves. Anonymous emails. Fake Yelp reviews claiming my businesses discriminated against white customers. Even a podcast episode accusing me of reverse redlining. And then came the lawsuit. Filed by a conservative property rights group based out of Texas. The suit claimed that my anti-bias lease provisions were unconstitutional and a form of ideological coercion. They tried to paint me as a woke land baron. They claimed I was running a race-based real estate cartel. I remember reading the language out loud to Diane in disbelief. She just laughed and said, "They're scared. That's good. Means we're close." We prepared our defense. Carefully. Methodically. But I knew one thing. We couldn't win this in silence. Not this time. So I made the decision to go public. One evening I sat down in front of my laptop. No lights. No makeup. No crew. Just me. And the truth. I looked into the camera and said, "Some people think I'm dangerous. Because I demand dignity. Because I don't flinch when they raise their voices. Because I cancel leases instead of begging for respect. They call it tyranny. Call it correction. This isn't about race. It's about patterns. And if we don't break those patterns, they become walls our children will grow up thinking are normal. I won't let that happen. Not in my city. Not on my block." That clip hit 1 million views in 4 days. And with it came a wave of support I couldn't have predicted. Civil rights lawyers offered amicus briefs. Real estate leaders pledged to adopt the model. Even former city officials, Black, white, Latino, came forward to sign public letters of support. But the most powerful response didn't come from a headline or a celebrity. It came from a 17-year-old girl in Detroit. She sent a handwritten letter. On notebook paper. Neat cursive. "Dear Ms. Dalton, I watched your video after my mom showed me. I've been scared to walk into certain stores because of how they look at me. Sometimes I wear glasses even though I don't need them, just to seem safer. But after watching you I took them off. I'm not invisible anymore. Thank you." That letter now lives framed in my office. Right above the deed to the Belmont building. Because that's the real reason I fight. Not to win arguments. Not to punish ignorance. But to make space where Black girls can walk in without apology. And know they belong. The lawsuit dragged on for 3 months. In court, their lawyers tried to paint me as hostile. Unreasonable. Radical. They used words like activist landlord. As if the two couldn't coexist. But I had one thing they didn't: receipts. Video. Testimony. Data. Precedent. And when the judge, an older Black woman with piercing eyes, ruled in our favor, she didn't just cite the law. She cited intent. Protection against systemic harm, she said, is not coercion. It is justice codified. That ruling. It sent a ripple through the industry. By the end of the year, 4 other landlords in 3 different states had reached out to replicate the bias-free model. We were becoming more than a block. We were becoming a blueprint. But just as the dust began to settle, another challenge emerged. One I hadn't expected. One from within. Because the moment you build something powerful, there will always be someone close to you who thinks they can do it better. And this time that person was someone I trusted. Her name was Raven, my former chief of operations. Smart, methodical, beautiful in a way that turned boardrooms into her runway, but sharper than any man who tried to underestimate her. She was the kind of woman who could memorize zoning codes like poetry and still critique a wine list like a Parisian sommelier. I had hired her 3 years prior, back when I was still managing only 2 properties. She handled acquisitions, contracts, and even sat in on city planning meetings when I couldn't. For a while she was indispensable. But the higher we climbed, the more I noticed something in her tone. Calculation. Tension. Not rebellion exactly, just resentment. First I ignored it, wrote it off as pressure. We were both working overtime, and I knew firsthand how heavy the weight of responsibility could get. But then, after the court victory, things began to shift, quietly but unmistakably. Meetings where she spoke over me, deals she approved without my sign-off, emails she blind copied me on only after contracts were finalized. I started getting CC'd on conversations with potential investors, conversations I hadn't authorized. And then came the whisper I hadn't expected. One of my junior staff, Maya, bright-eyed loyal, came into my office one morning, closed the door behind her, and said in a voice laced with conflict, "I think Raven's building something behind your back." I didn't flinch, didn't react, just nodded slowly. "What makes you think that?" "She's been meeting with some of the other property owners around the West End, privately, off books. And last night I overheard her on a call, talking about forming a progressive landlord coalition. But she didn't mention you. Not once." I thanked Maya and sent her home early with pay. Then I called Diane. "I need a quiet audit," I said. Discreet. Everything Raven's touched in the last 6 months. Diane didn't ask questions. 3 days later, the results were sitting on my desk. The findings. Raven had created a shell company 2 months ago, Equiblock Partners, and used it to approach 3 smaller black-owned property firms in Atlanta. Her pitch was compelling. A new investment collective run by black women, focused on ethical redevelopment and community-aligned property policies. Sounded a lot like what we were already doing. Except she had scrubbed my name out of every vision document. There was no mention of my company. No mention of my legacy. She was building a movement off the back of mine, and trying to take my staff with her. I sat alone in my office that evening, staring out the window, the city lights glittering below like a million tiny judgments. Raven wasn't just a defection. She was proof that even inside your own walls, power attracts envy. I could have fired her immediately, changed the locks, served her a cease and desist. But that would have made it personal. And this was still business. So I called a staff meeting. Every department head, every partner, even interns. I stood at the front of the boardroom. No anger, no drama, just facts. "We built something radical," I began. "We changed a conversation no one else had the courage to touch. And because of that we're being watched, imitated even." Paused, letting the air tighten. "But be clear, we are the blueprint. Anyone trying to repackage this work without acknowledging the foundation it was built on isn't building a movement. They're building a knockoff." I didn't name her. I didn't have to. Raven wasn't in the room. She was conveniently sick that day. But the message was clear. The next morning I accepted her resignation letter, emailed at 3:07 a.m., no subject line, no explanation. It didn't even sting. What did sting, though, came a week later. I was at a local business conference when I saw her across the hall, laughing with a city councilman I used to mentor. Her startup now had its own website. Lease. Well designed. Professional photos of her posed like she was already on the cover of Forbes. Underneath it all, policies, programs, phrases, word-for-word copies of documents we had built together. And then I saw it. In bold letters on her About page. Founded by women tired of waiting for outdated voices to lead the future. That cut deeper than I expected. Because I hadn't just trained Raven. I had trusted her. Opened doors for her. Paved floors for her to walk on without tripping. And now she was selling the lie that I was a relic. A fossil of respectability politics. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid of losing influence. But because I realized something far more dangerous. We hadn't just created a business model. We'd created a battleground. And every battleground attracts people who want to be generals. Even if they have to shoot the one who trained them. So I regrouped. Tightened internal policies. Brought Maya up as acting operations lead. Revamped our public messaging. Not to defend myself, but to double down on the core mission. Equity with teeth. I sent a message to my staff. Movements don't collapse when outsiders attack. They collapse when insiders forget who bled first. And I bled. For every lease rewritten. For every law challenged. For every smear I swallowed without blinking. I reminded them what it cost to win this war. And that I wasn't done fighting. Because for every Raven who tries to steal the spotlight, there's a Maya watching, learning, listening, waiting for someone to prove that power can be used without leaving ashes behind. I wasn't here to burn bridges. I was here to build bridges with pressure-sensitive glass. So that anyone who walked over it without reverence would fall straight through. 6 weeks after Raven walked out, I got the invitation I had never expected. Federal Summit. Organized by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Theme. Redefining urban equity through ownership. And there, at the very bottom of the agenda, was my name. Not buried in the footnotes. Not lumped into a panel. Keynote speaker. They were calling me a pioneer of anti-bias urban redevelopment. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing my laptop. Because I wasn't sure how to feel. I hadn't started this to be anyone's pioneer. I wasn't looking for applause. I was just trying to protect my mother's dignity over lunch. But that's how it always starts, doesn't it? One moment of humiliation. One woman who decides, never again. And suddenly a whole system gets rearranged. I accepted the invitation. Quietly. No press announcement. No social media blast. If they wanted me to speak, I would speak. But they needed to hear the truth. Not the polished version. The truth about how I sat in bank lobbies for hours in a suit and still got asked if I was delivering something. The truth about how I had to walk through construction zones I owned, while being told to wait outside. The truth about how it's not enough to buy the building. You have to survive the constant attempts to evict your existence from it. When I arrived in D.C., the air felt thinner. The kind of thin that says, this city doesn't breathe unless you hold your breath first. I wore a black suit. Not power red. Not feminist white. Just black, sharp, quiet, controlled. The ballroom was vast. Chandeliers, velvet chairs, a podium that looked like it had been carved from oak and compromise. As I stepped onto the stage, I felt the weight of every eye in that room. Policymakers, real estate moguls, non-profit directors, even a few senators tucked in the back, pretending to blend in. I adjusted the mic, looked straight ahead, and said, I was kicked out of a restaurant that I owned the lease to, not because I was loud, or late, or disruptive, but because I looked like someone they didn't think belonged. That cop didn't ask who I was. He didn't know he was speaking to the woman who could cancel his favorite lunch spot with one phone call. But that's the problem, isn't it? We keep trying to look like we belong, hoping one day we'll finally be let in. I'm not here to be let in. I'm here to own the room. Silence. Then thunderous applause. The kind that doesn't erupt, it builds. Low. Reluctant. Then roaring. After the speech, a line formed. Not just young professionals looking for mentorship, but seasoned executives, politicians, developers who'd ignored me 5 years ago now asking for breakfast meetings. But the most powerful moment didn't come from a handshake. It came from a black janitor in his 60s. He waited until the room cleared, then walked up slowly, hat in hand. "You said something," he said. "Something I ain't heard nobody say into a microphone before." Smiled. "What part?" He looked down, eyes glassy. "That bit about not being let in. About owning the room." He paused. "I clean a lot of rooms, but I've never felt like one was mine." "Thank you." We shook hands. And that was it. No cameras. No interviews. Just two people who understood what it meant to be seen. Later that night, I sat in the hotel bar, drinking water with lemon, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Councilwoman Marla Jameson. She looked more tired than usual. "Don't say yes yet," she said, sliding a manila folder onto the table. Opened it. Inside plans. Proposals. A new district initiative. They were offering me a city-funded project, an entire block slated for redevelopment. But this time I wouldn't just be leasing. They wanted me to design it. From scratch. Full complex. Retail. Housing. Community space. "Imagine," she said. "A space built by people who understand what exclusion feels like. A blueprint for what dignity looks like." It was everything I had ever wanted. But it was also more than I had ever planned for. Because this wasn't just ownership. This was legacy, etched in concrete and zoning codes. I told her I'd need a week to think. She nodded. "Take 2. But just know. If you say no, they're handing it to a private developer from out of state. Someone who's never even had to ask where they're allowed to sit." I said nothing. Just sat with the weight of it all. The next morning I flew back to Atlanta. Maya picked me up from the airport. "I saw your speech," she said, grinning. Smiled back. "How did I do?" "You scared them. Which means you did great." Back at the office, the team had left flowers on my desk. A handwritten note from the interns. "Thank you for kicking doors open we didn't even know were locked." I read it 3 times before placing it beside the framed letter from the Detroit girl. Then I called Marla. "I'll do it," I said. "On one condition." "Name it." "I want full creative control. No city meddling. No political compromises." She hesitated, then said, "Deal." And just like that I was no longer a landlord. I was an architect, of space, of memory, of what it means to walk into a building and not wonder if you'll be asked to leave. Designing the block wasn't just about bricks and windows. It was about rewriting a feeling. Replacing that old hum of anxiety, the one black folks know all too well when we enter space not built with us in mind, with something radically different. That was the word I carried into every meeting with the architects. Not luxury. Not trendy. Not affordable. Ease when walking through the door and seeing art that reflected your grandmother's laugh. Ease when ordering food from a restaurant where the staff didn't look through you. Ease when dropping your child off at a learning center and knowing the curriculum wasn't built to erase their history. I didn't want the block to just exist. I wanted it to breathe. I brought Maya to every planning meeting. Not because she had the most experience but because she had the most clarity. Her sense of purpose was unshakable. And I needed someone at my side who still remembered what it felt like to be invisible. We worked for months. We sourced black architects, hired queer engineers, brought in women-led firms for interior design. Every contractor signed our new equity-first code before even seeing the blueprint. Some called it overkill. I called it insurance against erasure. By the 5th month the block had a name. The Sovereign Square. Simple, grounded, undeniable, and right in the center of it all. A public courtyard that held no fountain, no sculpture. Just a circle of benches surrounding an open platform. Space for speech, for protest, for poetry, for gospel, for truth. It was Maya's idea. "Most developers build centers of consumption," she said. "Let's build a center for voice." I nodded because she was right. And she was no longer just my assistant. So I promoted her. Chief of Cultural Strategy. The youngest department head in the entire state's redevelopment history. She cried in the elevator after I told her. Said she wished her dad were alive to see it. And I said, he does. Trust me. But just as the blueprints were finalizing and construction permits were lined up, the past came back in the form of a phone call. From Raven. I was alone in my office. The city outside my windows glowing gold and gray as twilight poured in. The phone buzzed once. And I knew. Picked up. Raven, I said flatly. She didn't waste time. Before you hang up, just listen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. You've got 2 minutes. I messed up, she said. No preamble. No excuses. Just that. I said nothing. She continued. I got caught up trying to prove I didn't need you. But the truth is, I built my whole playbook from yours. I thought, if I could beat you, I'd finally be more than your shadow. But I didn't beat you. I lost everything. I didn't gloat. Didn't sigh. I just asked, why now? Because I saw what you're building. The Sovereign Square. I walked past the site yesterday and I realized, even if my name's never on it, I want to see it finished. Even if I can't sit at your table, I still want it built. I let her words hang in the air. Raven was never a villain. Just a woman who mistook ambition for betrayal. Seen it before. And if I was honest, I understood it. I'm not hiring you, I said. I know. But I'll let you contribute. As a volunteer. On weekends. No titles. No leverage. She exhaled. Sounded like relief. Thank you, she whispered. I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it for the block. She didn't argue. And that's how we began again. Not as partners, but as 2 women laying bricks beside each other in silence. By month 8, construction had begun. Fences were up. Cranes moved like giants. The city buzzed with curiosity. And then, on a Sunday morning, something unexpected happened. My mother showed up at the site. She didn't call first. Just walked across the gravel in sandals and a linen dress, her gray hair braided back, her eyes sharper than the day I was kicked out of the restaurant. I was checking layout specs with the project lead when I turned and saw her. Froze. Mama. I had to see it, she said. With my own eyes. I walked over slowly. I would have brought you next week when the frame. She held up her hand. No more waiting, she said. I've waited long enough. We stood in the center of the lot. The noise of machines all around us, the hum of Atlanta in the background. And for a moment it was just us. Just 2 generations of women who had both been told this section isn't for you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the framed restaurant reservation from that day. Still intact. Still timestamp. She took it in her hands, smiled and said, let's hang this in the community center. Not as a scar, but as a start. He nodded. And together we stepped back. Looking out across Sovereign Square. The future built from one moment of humiliation. Transformed into a space where no one would ever be told to leave again. The grand opening of Sovereign Square was set for a warm Saturday morning in late April. We didn't send out a formal invitation. No celebrity host. No ribbon cutting by a mayor desperate for headlines. No plastic banners or corporate logos cluttering the skyline. Instead, we let the block speak for itself. From sunrise, people began to gather. Not just from Atlanta, but from Charlotte, Birmingham, even a few who had flown in from LA and DC. Word had spread. This wasn't just a development. It was a declaration. And declarations don't whisper. They resonate. By 9 a.m. the courtyard was full. Parents with children. Elders in folding chairs. Teenagers filming on their phones. Artists. Preachers. Quiet onlookers who didn't say much, but you could see it in their eyes. They felt something here. The Sovereign Square sign stood tall at the entrance. No gold. No polish. Just deep black steel etched with our motto. You belong here. I stood on the edge of the platform in the center circle. The one Maya had envisioned. the one built for voice. She was beside me now, wearing a maroon jumpsuit and her hair in a proud crown of coils. The weight of leadership sat on her shoulders like it had always been waiting for her. "This is your mic," I whispered. But she shook her head. "No, it's ours." I nodded once, then stepped back. Maya walked up, slow and calm, holding the kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention. It commands it. When she spoke, she didn't use a script. She didn't need one. We built this place with hands that remember exclusion, with eyes that've been watched too closely, with voices that were told to lower. But today, right here, we raise them. Applause rose like a wave, but she held up her hand. And we remember the moment this all began. One woman, one phone call, one restaurant that said she didn't belong. And now, here we are, standing in what she owns. She turned to me then, and the crowd followed her eyes. And that's when it happened. They rose to their feet. All of them. Clapping, cheering, some crying. And me. I stood still. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I finally felt it. Not power. Not vengeance. But justice. The kind that doesn't just punish what was wrong, but builds what should have always been right. After the ceremony, people flooded the spaces. Kids danced in the courtyard. Elders strolled the shaded walkways lined with murals of Black poets and freedom fighters. Young couples explored the micro-libraries tucked between garden beds. Teens hovered at the solar-powered charging stations while playing music from their phones. Inside the cultural center, the first exhibition was titled, "Uninvited, Unbothered." It showcased photographs, reservation slips, complaint forms, all chronicling public acts of quiet racism. But beside each artifact, there was a corresponding piece of art. A sculpture, a poem, a quilt. Evidence of how pain becomes fuel, and how that fuel becomes light. One woman stood frozen in front of a photo of the restaurant that had started it all. A side-by-side comparison, before and after my lease termination. The second photo showed a dark, empty storefront with a handwritten sign. "Closed for renovations." She turned to me, blinking slowly. "You didn't destroy them. You just made the world watch them self-destruct." He nodded. "That's the thing about power. When it's not built on truth, it always collapses under the weight of its own ignorance." She smiled. "You didn't shout. You shifted." Outside, I saw Raven helping serve lemonade at one of the welcome booths. No name tag. No microphone. Just her hands moving fast, eyes scanning the crowd, a quiet purpose stitched into her posture. We locked eyes across the crowd. She nodded. I nodded back. There was no bitterness now. No competition. Just two women who had once stood on opposite ends of ambition, now joined by something heavier and more sacred. Legacy. Later that afternoon, my mother asked if she could say something. I was surprised. She was never one for the spotlight. But I brought her to the mic, and the courtyard hushed immediately. She stood slowly, steady, regal in her simplicity. "I want to say thank you," she began. "Not just to my daughter but to this whole block. Because years ago, someone looked at me and saw a reason to say, 'Take it elsewhere.' But today, there's nowhere else I'd rather be." Silence hung in the air. Heavy. Holy. Then came the applause. Not polite. Not scripted. But from the soul. And in that moment I knew. We hadn't just built a space. We had built a story. One that would be told every time a black child walked across those bricks without wondering if they were too loud, too dressed, too brown to stay. One that would whisper into every office, every boutique, every classroom on that square. "You belong here." The sun began to set, casting gold across the buildings. I walked back to the center of the courtyard alone, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "It started with a table, and ended with a city." Well, not ended. Began. Because this was only the first square. There were blocks to build next, cities to reclaim, silences to break. And somewhere out there, another black woman was being told to move. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to make the ground shake.